A little earlier in the program, we showed you how President Trump's base is sticking with him no matter what he says or does. That includes, of course, the religious right. Even after Christianity Today wrote a scathing front-page editorial saying Trump should be removed from office, evangelicals, they rallied around the president. In a new book called Shadow Network, details how the American right gets its message out by both using money and the media to influence voters and also policy. Let's bring in the author of that book, Ann Nelson. And thank you very much. And let's start this story kind of where you began, which is Ronald Reagan just gets elected. It's 1981. And unlike a lot of other groups, this group wasn't looking for attention, but 50 some odd folks got together and they had some common interests in mind. And all these decades later, certainly that influence has been felt.
Absolutely. This group was made up of fundamentalists, political strategists from the Goldwater campaign and a lot of oil interests. And they had a long-term strategy that was to capitalize on Reagan's victory to really create a plan to take over the entire government. And they've been working on it for 40 years.
And did they do it because they saw an opportunity or because they were afraid when they looked at the changing demographics of this country and a lot of what they believed in? Clearly, they were against a woman's right to choose, against gay rights, etc. Did they do this more out of fear or out of opportunity?
I think it was both, Richard, because Reagan gave them an opportunity to put their people into government and to start reorganizing aspects of the government. They were very much against environmental regulations. They were against taxation and social programs. So they got to start with the Reagan administration. But they also realized that the demographics of the U.S. were becoming younger and women and minority groups were getting more power and influence. So if they didn't move quickly to change the rules, they were threatened with losing out in the long term.
You, as they say, follow the money throughout this book, and there's a lot of principles you look at, two families in particular. You followed the Koch brothers and the DeVos family. Talk about how there's a common thread line here, and what did they want for a return on investment?
Well, the Koch brothers obviously had their roots in the oil industry, and they wanted to do away with environmental regulations as well as taxes. They didn't have much of a religious component to their philosophy, but they were really free market absolutists with very little sympathy for anyone who didn't have the resources. The DeVos family came from this Amway fortune and from Michigan, from a very conservative Calvinist sect, but they also fought against regulations. And when the federal government went after them for violations committed in their business practices, they fought back. They fought back against taxes. They have for a long time fought against public education, public schools, public teachers. So they were, the Koch brothers and the DeVos family were able to join forces through dark money and this network of political strategy and implementation.
And also media. I'll date myself a little bit here. I remember the Paul Weyrichs of the world here, but they were more of a fringe element, nothing like what we saw on Fox News today. But when you're going through your book, you can almost see the birth of this fake news where you pick one platform on cable news where you know they're going to go in overwhelming numbers. You use these new digital platforms, and you can kind of make the stories up as you go along, as long as you've got a rigid adherence from your audience. Talk about how it went from a concept to now the delivery.
Well, I trace in my book Shadow Network the roots in fundamentalist radio. And if you drive around the middle of the country, these radio stations are everywhere. In my research, I found that there were over 500 stations operating that distribute content to some 3,000 more. Now, this is not what we would call journalism in any way, shape, or form. It's unidirectional political messaging, where every Democrat is a demon and Trump is an instrument of God. This is networked now into a publishing house, into a feature film industry. Certainly you have a lot of it replicated on Fox News, and you have a member of the Council for National Policy, the subject of my book, in the form of General Jerry Boykin, appearing on Fox News constantly right now talking about Iran. So you have these messages occurring across platforms directed at very specific voting blocks in swing states. That's one reason they've been so effective.
You know, one of the things we were talking, you go back to Reagan, I mean, you had Republicans, and he preached the idea of a Big Tent philosophy. You know, you had the Javitzes of the world that still had a place in the Republican Party. Good friend of this program, Chris Shays, another moderate, one of the last remaining Republicans from New England. I always thought that, well, the parties went to their polar ends, and as a result, the moderates went away. It wasn't so much coincidental. It almost seems like it was coordinated on the part of the Republican Party, that everybody has to be coming out of one end of the party now, that there's not a place for moderates. They almost didn't want them in here.
Moderate Republicans were the first targets of this movement. They went through and purged moderates. They purged Republicans in Congress who wanted to work across the aisle with Democrats. This was a very intentional and transparent strategy. They even paid into campaigns to defeat moderate Republicans in certain districts. So what I consider the authentic Republican Party was the first target of this movement.
I just finished a conversation last segment with a reporter from Slate who covers the changing of the judiciary in just the last 3 years under this current president, and he used the Fifth Circuit as a perfect example about how radicalized it's become in really a short window of time. To that end, I have struggled, and I got to admit, your book does a good job of explaining why. But why the evangelicals, or anyone that has some morality as a major portion of their platform, how they can go along to get along with this president, but this is a conscience Faustian bargain that these folks did. And while they maybe never imagined a Donald Trump in 1981, they swallowed hard, but they decided if he gets us as an ends to a means, we'll do it. Do you ever see him going to a place where even they can't stomach?
Well, the leadership of this movement, I believe, is manipulating a lot of evangelical congregations and pastors. They've set out to do it very, very deliberately. And they've manufactured some issues, including on a basis that is not truthful, such as the way they present the discussions around abortion. They are just untruthful. But they use it to go after the emotions of these congregations and to pressure people and to pressure pastors to push their congregations into voting in certain ways. They use the churches. They put out their voting information in the sanctuaries. They network them through cell phone apps and social media. So this is a very long-standing, well-financed, well-strategized campaign, and it's happened under the surface. So I hope this shadow network will shine a light on it and just show people how these voters have been lured to the polls to vote against the social programs that would benefit them and their children.
Well, if I know my audience, be prepared to be a little freaked out by this fantastically researched book. Again, Shadow Network, Media Money, and the Secret Hub of the Radical Right. Ann Nelson, great job. I appreciate the time.
Thank you, Richard.
All right, everyone, when we come back, we're going to shift gears here. There are new details on what Boeing knew and when it knew it before the two tragic crashes of its 737 MAX jets. Communications between employees, they have now been released, and trust me, the picture they paint is more than disturbing on what was going on behind closed doors.